you need to message me when you're going live. Okay, we are live. A very warm good evening to all the Johnites out there and other people who have joined into this stream. A huge welcome from the St. John's Medical College Alumni Association. We are very, very excited to start this new initiative called as the Johnite Tales. To speak about it a bit more, and a very, very special first guest that we have, whom we are very, very honored and privileged to have. I would now like to invite our president of the St. John's Medical College Alumni Association, Dr. Anthony Robert, who is also an experienced pediatric surgeon, to introduce the concept of the Johnite Tales and, more importantly, the privilege of introducing our first guest. Dr. Anthony, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nitin. At the outset, I want to appreciate my two young Turks, Nitin Yashas, my academic secretary, and Prithvi Dasri, and of course, George, who's handling the show today. So I'm very excited with this initiative, this new series. It's going to be a recurring one every month. We're going to turn the spotlight on Johnites, both overseas and in India, who have done inspiring work, and allow the younger Johnites today of this generation to get to know their work, to get to know what was their motivation, and also to take away a lot of inspiration from their work. And rest assured, there will be lady nights and gentleman nights in this order of calling up. I'm very happy to introduce Dr. Salim Yusuf. Most of us from my generation above don't need any introduction to him, but for the benefit of the youngsters, he's a stellar Johnite from the 1969 batch, one of the earliest Rhodes Scholars from St. John's, grew into a really prominent figure worldwide in cardiology, pioneered many, many large studies, and played a pivotal role in setting up the St. John's Research Institute. He has worked with Dr. Prem Payas, Dr. Anura, and Dr. Dennis, who's also part of our committee. And he has made, within his own short time, significant therapeutic changes in actual clinical practice. And that is rare for people to see it in impact. He's also an epidemiologist par excellence. I'm handing the show back to Nitin Yashas. Let's sit back and listen to this giant of a Johnite. Welcome, Dr. Salim.
Thank you.
Right at the outset, I just would like to thank you so much, sir, for taking time off your hectic schedule. And despite the time difference on a Monday morning, to take time off your schedule to joining us. Like Dr. Anthony said, for all of us, Dr. Salim Yusuf is not just a name, but an institution by itself. But today we would like to explore the story behind Dr. Salim Yusuf as such. And with that regard, I would like to start off by asking, how did the decision to join medical school and become a doctor start off? How was your childhood, and whether during your college and school days, was there something that influenced you to become a doctor and join medical school?
Nitin, it's hard to, before I start, let me just say, I'm first honored and humbled to be invited to participate in this series and to be the inaugural participants. I also want to congratulate you, Anthony and Prithvi and others for doing this because I think this will connect the current generation of students with the previous generation of students, teachers, and alumni. So I think in some sense, more than Johnites, I would think of this as connections. You asked me what led to the decision to join medicine. I cannot think of a single specific moment or single reason why I went into medicine. There was nobody in our immediate family who was a doctor. My parents were not in medicine. My father was in personal management. My mother was a chemistry graduate. However, at home, there was always a culture that education was very important. And it was a ticket to a better life. And by a better life, I mean not just economically, but also holistically, a perspective on society and compassion for others. My father and my mother were both engaged in doing various activities. I won't call them social or social uplift, but in a sense, activities that had a social conscience and meaning to them. They were very secular, and we were brought up that way. Throughout our childhood, education was a high priority. They sent us to the best schools that they could find wherever we lived. And I expect one of the biggest expenses in our home every month was the school fees. And my father would get us books to read, storybooks usually, and we had to summarize what we read every week into a two-page précis, and in good handwriting. My father had very good handwriting, and he'd correct the grammar, the style, and the handwriting. And this probably started when we were about in the fifth or sixth grade. My mother was the one who helped us with much of our homework, and I do remember her going over the multiplication tables with us. So not only did they encourage education, they were involved in our education. And I did medicine because that was what my parents suggested to me. And obviously, we knew doctor friends whom we respected a lot. We thought they were doing good for other people. And we knew they were economically reasonably well off. So it seemed like a career where you could have a great deal of satisfaction, earn a good living, intellectually stimulating. And that was how there wasn't a single decision. Over years, I was channeled towards medicine. And then in the last few years of school, because that's when you decide which line where- of further education you would pursue, which stream, uh, I was focused on biology, chemistry, physics, and worked hard. I knew it wasn't easy to get into medicine, and so um, you know, I would my wish every day was, dear God, help me get into a medical college. So it was a strong, strong ethos. My brother ultimately also went into medicine. He's a well known thoracic surgeon in Kerala. So, and then we both of us have been role models to others in the family. So, that in a nutshell is how it happened. Yeah.
Oh, wow, that's really fascinating to hear the story. So you said that you sort of prayed and worked really hard to get into medical school. So what were your first reactions when you stepped into St. John's Medical College, and how were those initial years? Because today the entire structure, not just of the building, but many things have changed in St. John's, and no better person than you to reflect on those initial first 2 years in pre and paraclinical, and how they were in really an era which has gone by, but probably a magical era as such.
Actually, it was the interview itself was quite an adventure, and a entire lifetime over 3 days. The form of the interviews, never had done it before, being questions, and suddenly you're told you've got in, and then starting, and you have a small suitcase full of clothes, enough to last a few days, and you just had to join. And then we joined people in the college. We were in the hostel, a lot of them, and guess what? There was ragging. And to be honest, the ragging was very pleasant. Let me put it that way. It wasn't nasty. It was funny. It was a bit awkward for us at various times. But the ragging actually bonded us between the various students. And some of the culture of the ragging was one where there was little physical harm or mental humiliation. We The first year of medical college in those days had what was called pre-professional, which is a wonderful year because we've just been liberated from school for the first time, living by ourselves in a wonderful city, Bangalore, such a beautiful city those days. And it was a bit isolated from the uh, main city. I mean, you had to, there were occasional buses from Adugodi up to the college, but then, and the whole stretch from Adugodi to the college was just vineyards and open lands. And the college, the PPC years were great. We went to movies. There wasn't much pressure on education because essentially you were repeating what you'd already studied in school, and you already knew you were in medical college, so it wasn't very competitive, and the pressure was off. It was also a time we forged lifelong friendships. We played a fair amount of sport and games, got involved in extracurricular activities. There was a lot of interesting things like drama and music in St. John's those days. I don't know if they still exist. Hopefully they do. But then it was a big shock to go into first MBBS in anatomy, physiology, and biochemistry. And the amount of effort needed was something like fivefold. And we all buckled down and worked very hard. And I remember Professor Mehta, the head of anatomy, he was a fantastic teacher. At our first weekly test, everybody in the class failed the first weekly test. And it's not for lack of trying. We all tried very, very hard. He wasn't very pleased. At the second test, again, everybody failed. The third test, two or three people passed. And I remember it was probably Eunice Miskett was the first person in our batch to pass the anatomy exam. Physiology and biochemistry were not that hard. Most people, good numbers passed if you worked hard. And we were really working hard on anatomy. We burned the midnight oil, but we weren't getting far. Part of it was we were learning the ability to process a large amount of information. And then we found group studies were very helpful. Two or three or four people the night before the exams, weekly tests, would get together and go over what we were meant to study, and that started to help. And soon, uh, people got better marks and started to pass. And that's on that side. But then after the weekly test, we'd all go out at town. When I say all, in groups of four, five, six, seven, into town, hang out on Brigade Road, Residency Road, go for a nice meal, perhaps a cinema, and then come back. And I recall Sunday morning was a time you do the chores around your room. Sunday afternoon, you play some sport with friends. Sunday evening, you slide back into the study mode. So it was a nice balance between intense studies, the socialization, sport, extracurricular activities. I think the mess hall was a great location for people to meet over breakfast and dinner. And in those days, after we finished first MBBS, we used to go to St. Martha's for clinical training. And we went in a little bus. And so we all rode together. There were The groups were small, they were cohesive, they were supportive. The teachers were very supportive. Being only 60 students, I think everybody knew each other. The teachers probably knew each one personally, and we knew the teachers. They, they were of varying degrees of strictness, but they were all warm. And what was very clear was they were very committed to each of us individually. I mean, it was just remarkable when I think of it. I think the personal attention we received in a class of 60 on the medical college as a whole, being about 250 or 300 people, was just remarkable. I don't know whether that personal connections and mentorship still sustained. The other wonderful thing is, teachers used to come to our hockey matches when we played other teams like St. Joseph's or Christchurch and cheer for us. And I even remember the dean coming for the finals. So, in a sense, they took pride in everything that we did, and we felt a good connection. Some of the younger teachers, at that time young, but now they're more senior, like Ravi Narayan and Dara Amar, were wardens at the college, and they lived in the hostels in that little one bedroom apartment at the bottom of each building. And they interacted with the students, both informally. They were there to put out any problems or deal with any problems that occurred, but more like much more was they befriended us. I remember going on for long walks with Ravi or Dara and just talking about anything and everything. And so there was that sense of connections, a sense of family between the students and the teachers. Some of the senior teachers like Mehta, Sharma, and on the clinical side, Brigadier Naik and G.N. Reddy, and on the other preclinical sides, Tangam Joseph, John Thomas. These were people we respected. There was a great deal of awe. Manorama Thomas, these people, I probably won't be doing service to everybody. The Sharmas were very key. They would invite students to their home too. So, you know, I don't know whether it still happens. It may be very difficult with 150 students in each class. We knew the dean because he would come to the college hostel from time to time to talk to the students. So initially, we didn't have a hospital at St. John's. We went to St. Martha's, and I remember some of the first directors of the hospital, like like Father Percy. I wasn't a student then, but but I would visit the college a lot. I did a short 3 months sabbatical stint. Percy was very engaged with the students and the faculty. He was present. He had a clear vision of what he wanted done, and he communicated that to people. I hope our present leadership will be similar. I don't know. I've had relatively little to do the last 5 to 7 years, but I was quite engaged. So
I, I think very important message that you're bringing out, that at the end of the day, it's the connect which the college has with its student and with its alumni that really builds an institution for years to come. In fact, at this point of time, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Ravi Narayan, because really that shows how he has maintained a connection across batches, that I could call him, and he was the one who put me in touch with you, who really sort of got this thing going as such. So, Dr. Salim, you mentioned about going to Brigade Road, Adugodi. In fact, I mean, if you come to Adugodi now, you would probably be stuck in traffic. It would be faster to travel to Canada than make the journey from Adugodi to St. John's. But you mentioned about hockey. So, a little bit about your hockey exploits, any memories of the university tournaments or the interclass culturals?
yeah, hockey was interesting. It was culture building. It was building friendships. It was building a family and a team. I had never really played hockey when I was in school, and I guess I cannot remember why I gravitated to hockey, and even less I cannot understand why I was stuck in goal. As you all know, my stature is enlarged, so probably the worst candidate to be the hockey goalkeeper. I guess because nobody else wanted to do it, and they all wanted to run around and do the right thing. So we played, and we would 4 days out of five and then one day on the weekend after classes we'd all play. We just started off with just playing with each other. The college never fared very well initially, but I remember at a certain stage we started to become more and more competitive. I remember Daryl, trying to get his last name. Daryl was his first name. He was a very good player, great humor. Um, I think of him as being light skinned and blonde hair, um, and he was very good. Then in our class, there were a few people like KK James, Benjamin, Charlie, and a few others. And then in our junior batches, we started to have some good players like Emil Bardla and I forget some names. So Patrick Kamath, and there was a really good halfback. Tried to get his name. He was there, and then it all transformed with with a further batch when Hunga Shaw joined us from St. Joseph's. He had played for India in a sort of substitute role, but was superb. And there were a couple of other people like Raymond Perez, who had a bullet shot. Oh, I forget Ashley De Cruz. He was a wonderful forward, very elegant. So gradually over years, the team gelled, and every year in the intercollegiate, we'd move up and up. But the most notable year was about 2 years before we finished. And at that stage, we played Christchurch in the semifinals, and it went to penalty shootouts. And we squeaked through. And I was in goal. So obviously, a goalie had to do something to keep things going. We went to the All India Intermedicals and won it in Pondicherry. We first won the Karnataka Intermedicals in Davangere. And I recall we were all tiny compared to the opposition. They were big, Tagada guys. But we won easily. And then we went to Pondi and played in the All India Institute of Medicine, All India, what do you call, intermedical, and won it. And I must say, in the finals, as a goalkeeper, I made a mistake and let in a simple ball as the first goal. It put a lot of pressure on our team, but they didn't turn back, and we won 3-1, which was a huge success. Turned around from being 1-0 down. And I must admit, it wasn't my best game. I was actually running a fever and a temperature, but we didn't have a substitute goalkeeper. Then but that first year at the intermedical, we went to the finals, and we were beaten by St. Joseph's very handsomely, 5-0, which was a trouncing. But then the next year, we were very determined, and we tried very hard. And by that time, Hunga Shaw, who was at St. Joseph's, moved across to our place. And we were very determined. And over the next 2 years, we again gave to the finals. We thought the game was stolen from us the previous year. Who knows whether that's true, but that's the way we felt. And in the final, the fifth year that I was in college, which was 1975 or so, we got to the final. There was a grudge match against St. Joseph's, and it ended up with a draw, and 1-1 or something. And then at full time, and then we went to penalty strokes, and we won on the second set of five. And I can remember the elation in the college. The CM Francis, the dean, was there. Many of the professors were there. They all came, invaded the field, and many of the students came and carried the players on their shoulders. I must say, I've never had such an experience. It's better than getting.
No, I was just about to tell that, I've watched some of your academic lectures,
Mm.
and you're talking with the same passion as you would talk about your studies. And that really shows how much hockey, sports, and culturals means to a Johnite, and how they have really played a role in character building as such. I would just like to bring on screen George. He's the current president of the student committee at St. John's, and he has a question that he would like to ask you, sir. George, it's yours.
George, I can't see you or hear you.
George, are you there? We just have a small technical glitch. I think George would try to join in uh, as such. So we move on to the next question, sir. That really, how did you make your decision to move forward once you finished your MBBS? What were your career thoughts and perspectives at that point of time?
As I as I was finishing MBBS, like everybody else, my thought was, how do I get into post graduation? And I wanted to do MD medicine, but in those days, St. John's did not have an MD seats, and also there wasn't all India exams like you do now. So the path to get into post graduation wasn't very clear. Each college made their own decisions. Having secured several gold medals and been named the Pope Paul medalist. I thought I would be a strong candidate at the top places. And I visited, uh, and just before we finished, a very famous cardiac surgeon from Vellore, Stanley John, came to St. John's for 2 or 3 days and gave a series of inspiring lectures. So I wanted to be a cardiac surgeon. That was my first thought. And so I went to visit him at Vellore. He introduced me to the dean and other heads. And I raised the issue that would they consider me for a postgraduate seat? They were very kind and polite, but they essentially said, we only take our own students, or our own graduates. Um, the idea of the Rhodes Scholarship was not high on my list because first it's a long shot. It's like winning a lottery. And I didn't really know a whole lot about it, except that I remember Christopher Matthias had got it. And Christopher was an SHO on the medical unit when I was a student. And he was just terrific, a lovely man, inspiring teacher, good clinician. And I knew he had got it. I didn't really know what the Rhodes Scholarship was about. As I was finishing, it was Ravi who got me details of the Rhodes Scholarship and said, Salim, you should apply. So I thought about it and then started to fill out the applications. And what is a key part of it, obviously you got to say what you did academically and how you did, but also what you did extracurricular, because the Rhodes was very much about all rounders. And the so I wrote an essay, and the essay, and you have to write an essay. I can't remember how many words, 1,000 words or so. Anyway, I wrote an essay and in the way I could write. But fortunately for me, an individual called Chandu Bardhan, who was the brother of one of the two teachers in community medicine, um, uh, visited us, and Ravi and she introduced me to her brother Chandu Bardhan, who was a fellow graduate and a previous Rhodes Scholar at Oxford, who had done gastroenterology. He was very kind. He looked at my essay and he gave me a lot of suggestions to improve it. And my essay was about my work in my time and my work in Malur, as well as in the tea estates in Munar when I was doing my community medicine internship. In Malur, we had a project on, um, uh, you know, purifying the wells with chlorination, and how we did it with a team of high school students, and how we made a difference, perhaps to the rates of at least GI diseases for a short period of time. I don't know whether it's sustained. And in the tea estates, which is fun. And I would heartily recommend people to go and do a stint out in the tea estates. In the day, mornings we would work in the hospital, but in the evenings, afternoons and evening, the vans would take us through these scenic drives into the tea estates, and we do all kinds of surveys. And I remember catching scabies from school children. James and I were involved in that. I think Kurian and I were involved in the Malud project. Anyway, it was a Malud project on purifying water, and the tea estates on knowledge, attitude, and practice on family planning, because we noticed that the rates of tubal ligation was something like 10 times higher than the rates of vasectomy. And we tried to understand it because, vasectomy is so simple, doesn't require hospital admission, whereas tubal ligation is a little more uh, involved in those days, required 1 or 2 days of hospital admission. And we did a survey and we couldn't find the reason till somebody in the one of the tea estates told us, sir, if I have a vasectomy and my wife gets pregnant, I will lose face. That's when we realized there was a lot of extramarital activities going on in between the tea bushes. And you can't overcome these things by simple education. So, again, going back to the Rhodes application, these two things figured prominently in my application. And then at the interview, which lasted, in my memory, about 55 minutes,
Oh, wow.
I mean, it varied. Some people were 15, 20 minutes. Mine may have been one of the longer. They they discussed this with me. I wouldn't say they grilled me. I might have been nervous going in, but soon they helped me relax. There were previous Rhodes scholars who had come back, who were very senior people in the Indian government, people who were ambassadors, the Canadian ambassador to India, I distinctly remember. There were others too. Very accomplished and distinguished people, but they really put me at ease. And I remember one individual who was the vice chancellor of one of the universities in Bengal. It'll come back to me. His name was Asim Kumar Datta, particularly warm, very encouraging. And anyway, the long and short of it is there were 11 people at the interview. I must say, I ruled myself out because all of them were taller than me, which is easy. And the second part is they were really handsome people, and many people were, and in those days it was only men eligible, which I'm glad to say they changed. But anyway, they were all accomplished. One of them had even represented India in shooting at the Olympics. They were all toppers at the university and really well spoken. So I didn't think I had much of a chance, which actually made me more relaxed. And then, as it happens, on the second day, when they announced the results at lunch, and I and another person, Rajiv, oh, I'm trying to get his name, Rajiv, got where they announced it. They took us immediately aside to another room where we continued our lunch, and they explained to us about how all the things in store for us and how to choose a college. Rajiv Patke was his name, an English scholar. Anyway, and then I had to take the long trek back from Secunderabad, where the interview was, back to Bangalore. There was no seats on the regular fast train, so I had to come by passenger train that stopped everywhere. In those days, telephone connections weren't common, so there wasn't a telephone at home. So I couldn't get through to my parents. So a telegram was sent by Asim Kumar Datta to my father rather than me. And I took the long journey alone back in a practically empty, unreserved compartment back to Bangalore. And I think I managed to get a message across to Ravi. So when I came back and went to the mess hall, Ravi and a few people were there, and they warmly congratulated me. So that's a story. And
Wow,
then
it's really fascinating to hear the story of really what happened during the Rhodes Scholar interview. And speaking of Rhodes Scholar, we have Megha, who is a third year MBBS student, and she's the literary secretary, and she would like to ask you a question. Megha, I hope this works. Yeah,
Hi, am I audible?
yeah, you are. Go ahead.
you are Mega and
Good
visible too.
evening, sir. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Um, so my question was, St. John's is a college that has actually produced multiple Rhodes Scholars. So, in your opinion, what is it about the institution or what it provides that allowed for it to happen, that allowed for so many Rhodes Scholars to be produced from St. John's?
I mean, it's hard to say. The first one is role modeling. Obviously, people who've been Rhodes scholars before are recognized and celebrated by the college. So that then inspires other people to apply. The other thing was, remember in my days, there were only 60 students each year, which meant we got the cream of the cream in it, into the college. There was a lot of extracurricular activity. It was the all-round nature of the education. By education, I don't mean classroom education. Education is life experiences. The fact that you met people from all over the country, they came together to St. John's. And I wouldn't say sports was emphasized. It just happened. A lot of us played sports, and there were all kinds of extracurricular things, debating, and you're doing the literary society. There was acting. There was all kinds of things, and so I think it was that combined efforts. And one of the most remarkable things was when St. John's students went to help in the refugee camps during the Bangladesh war. And that was again, I mean, these were all role models. And so it made us aspire to more than being a standard doctor. And I think that probably was part of it. You'll have to ask this question to the other people who are Rhodes Scholars and see what they say. But, I think Rhodes is good. It's a it's a great opportunity, not a good opportunity. And the people who've got Rhodes Scholars have probably all done well. I haven't kept track of some of the junior people after me who got the Rhodes Scholarship, but I kept in touch with Chris Mathias, who's an extremely well recognized neurologist and neurophysiologist.
And someone who worked with the great Roger Bannister, who ran
Absolutely.
this
Yeah.
thing. Very fascinating stories to hear. So we now come across, and I'm really, really grateful that you have sort of agreed to talk about it, because sometimes it can be tough to talk about it. But there was a point of time in life when probably life throws surprises at you, and sort of as an oncologist, I see that. And there was a point of time in life when you were diagnosed with testicular cancer. If And really, more so to put it out there, that there are sometimes much bigger challenges in life, but impossible is nothing, and you can conquer it. So if you can reflect on the journey aspect as well.
Well, my wife Wahida and I were just married over a year when I was diagnosed with testicular cancer. At that stage, it was thought it was localized, so surgery, orchidectomy was done. My tumor markers were not elevated, and I thought I was cured. And then a few months later, the tumor markers were elevated, and they did a CT scan and X-ray, and there were cannonballs in the lungs, and they were spread. And so I had to undergo radiotherapy and chemotherapy, which I can say was one of the most horrible experiences of my life, for that matter, anybody's life. And I won't wish it on anybody. The drugs were very toxic. You lose all your hair. That's the least of it. But I lost my gut epithelium. So I was in constant abdominal discomfort, unable to keep things down, lost probably 15 kilograms or 10 kilograms or so weight. I now run about 65 kilograms. I think I was just about 47 or 48. It was frightening. I have to be honest with you. It was really frightening. I was terrified I would die. And I just took one week at a time, one day at a time. And you go in for chemotherapy, you get a bit better, and then I go back to work, both research or clinically. And I have to thank my supervisors, Richard Peter and Peter Slide, for being extraordinarily supportive. And my colleagues I was a registrar in chest medicine when I had chemotherapy. My colleagues who covered up for me, I couldn't do as much night calls. They covered up, and I did not lose income because of that. They were just kind and simple, small, unglorified ways. And I also remember I was petrified that if I die, what would happen to my mother, my brother, and my sister. My father had passed away. And I shared that with Richard Peter, who then talked to Sir Richard Doll, who was the Regis professor at Oxford, who then contacted a pharma company, ICI, whose work who was the beta, which produced the beta blocker we were working on, and they said, "Tell Dr. Yusuf not to worry. If he dies, we will support his family for 10 years or something like that." I can't remember what it is. I never knew that then. You know, I only knew that story later. How people like Doll never met me, never knew me, and it was Richard who took it to them, and he said, "Don't worry, we'll take care of him," because my father had died just before I left for Oxford, and so that put a bit of financial strain. But then my wife was very brave. She was very young, in her early 20s. But my mother and her mother came to Oxford and stayed with us, and Peter Slide, Richard Peter, they were just wonderful. And we went through. Then for many years, I was always concerned and anxious and even fearful that the cancer would return. Because, and in those days, cisplatin has just arrived, very toxic drug, but it increased the cure rate, in addition to bleomycin, vincristine or vinblastine, and etoposide, this was the big step. And but you didn't have good long-term data at that stage, so you weren't sure. But I think it took the cure rates to 90%. And the first round of chemotherapy made me neutropenic, pancytopenic, and I got a septicemia, and I was in delirium for a few days. But then they reduced the dose, and later on I learned that's almost the optimal dosing. You kill the cancer without killing the patient. They just about did that. Then for many years, this hung over my head, and it was always part of any decisions I would make. I'd be very frugal on money because should something happen to me, there needed to be money to support the family. We also thought we would never have children, but as it turned out, we did, natural children, which is a blessing. And it took me about 15 years to throw away the dark veil that the cancer brought about. I never talked about it publicly. I did not forbid others to speak about it. I think most people respected my confidentiality, my privacy. Now, looking back, oh, 40 years or so later, it seems like a story of grit, determination, and getting through. But at the time I was going through, I didn't feel anything like it.
I know that, and I as completely. I mean, you put it across so beautifully and so eloquently that it's very heartwarming. I had goosebumps listening to this because that is what we get from sometimes our patients who report cure, but those side effects. And I can quite imagine at that point of time when the supportive medicines were not as good as they were today, the cisplatin had just come in, what really would have gone through. But really, sir, I mean, I don't know if I can tell this, but on behalf of all Johnites, it's definitely a story of grit, courage, and determination that we all can look and take it and say that life can throw you challenges, but as long as you have a supportive family and you have the will to battle it out, you can conquer it as such. So let's talk about your time in Oxford and the path breaking pieces in beta blockers. I mean, today everyone prescribes beta blockers almost for all patients of cardiac diseases. We prescribe aspirin, which has become as common as dolo sometimes. And you are being the face and the mind behind some of these landmark studies. So how did these thoughts really come out, and what were the challenges in doing the research on these drugs which have now become the standard of care, but people really don't know the hard work or the stories behind these landmark studies?
See, when I was going to Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar, I wanted to be a pediatric cardiologist at that stage. So I wrote to the pediatric cardiologist, Douglas Pickering, and we had agreed on a protocol to measure cardiac shunts non invasively because I was interested in congenital heart disease. But when I arrived in Oxford, Douglas Pickering had a subarachnoid hemorrhage and was not able to supervise me. So here I was in Oxford with a 3-year scholarship, but no supervisor, no topic. And Peter Slide very kindly took me on. I mean, there was a clause in the Rhodes Scholarship that if you can't pursue what you want to pursue in Oxford, you could go to another university in England. So I went to the Rhodes House and met with the warden and said, "This is the problem." And he said, "I'd like you to rethink it and see whether you can remain in Oxford." And he said, "We bring you to Oxford not just for the academic experience, but the overall experience." I didn't fully understand it then. I understand it now. But anyway, going back to Peter Slide, after interviewing with a few other people in other areas, I realized gastroenterology or hematology wasn't my thing. And then other people in cardiology weren't that enthusiastic about the type research or the type of research they did was not attractive to me. Whereas Peter Slide was very warm. He took me on a drive out to a place called Swindon where he was giving a lecture. And in the car, both ways, we had a long conversations. He asked simple questions like, "Are you warm? Is the food suitable? Is your stipend adequate?" So he was good. And so we started to work. And he said, why don't you work on beta blockers in heart attack? So we did a protocol of 100 people, or designed a protocol of 100 people, two sides of a page. And we started trying to see if beta blockers would reduce the size of a heart attack, measured indirectly using ECG mapping. So 35 leads all over the chest, done every 8 hours for 1 or 2 days, and then once a day for a week. And then you measure the QRS wave and the ST segment from multiple beats on each lead. It was a lot of work. Each ECG would take about an hour or hour and a half to analyze. We worked very hard. But then then it looked like we were going nowhere. Uh, Fortunately for me, I received a British Heart Foundation a traveling scholarship to Göteborg and to Heidelberg. And by traveling to those places, I realized my work was really very weak, you know, and wasn't going that far. We managed to publish a couple of papers from it, and it was too complicated, too few people. And they told me, why don't you go and talk to Richard Peto? I said, who's Richard Peto? He said, he's a very famous clinical trials expert. And I said, where is he? And he said, he's in Oxford. He's in your building. So I hadn't even heard about it. So I came back and I met with Richard Peto, who was very kind, initially not keen to take on somebody because he said, I really want to do serious research. If you want to work with me, you're going to do serious research. And if you get your DPhil, that's great, but that's not the primary goal. So that was the first learning where two learnings. One is you make mistakes before you get it right. Second is go out to other places, other people, and you learn from them. And the third is when you do research not to get a degree, but that's what I wanted, to get a degree and then finish it and go back to clinical medicine. But to really make a difference, it takes time. And then I was fortunate. Robin Norris, who was a well-known researcher in acute heart attacks and one of the first founders of the CCU from New Zealand, came for a year's sabbatical. So he and I would spend hours and hours every day discussing ideas. I also went to visited places in the US, Harvard in particular, and people were generous and open and shared their ideas. The people in Sweden were open and generous. So our little study of 50 or 100 people became a study of 477 people with a publication in the Lancet, another in circulation. And in that study, we had a reduction in markers of infarct size. We also had a nominally significant reduction in deaths. So I thought, wow, we cracked it. That's great. Uh, but Richard said, no, you really have to do the proper study. And you need a study of 6,000 people to demonstrate it properly. And he and Peter Slide and I wrote grants. We raised the money. We started down the journey. Ultimately, 6,000 became 16,000. And it was the
Wow.
first large, simple trial in cardiology in acute MI. The results, I mean, at that time, there was no treatment that worked in acute heart attacks. So it was barely significant, 15% reduction in mortality and reinfarction. And I learned from Richard how to analyze and write papers. And then he probably doesn't write a paper in less than 50 drafts, but it is just remarkable how precisely he writes. And I learned how to write from him. When I give him things that I think are done well, it requires another 10 drafts. So he taught me how to write, how to design studies, how to do the studies, but through a supportive environment. And I then felt I needed to go. I got a British Heart Foundation scholarship after my finishing the first 477 patient study, and then or to finish it. But then I wanted to do clinical training again. We're very fortunate. A superb and brilliant young man called Rory Collins joined us, and he took over my role. Both Richard and he and Peter were kind. They kept me engaged while I was mainly doing full time clinical work. And on the nights and weekends, I'd go to the lab and work on the trials. We set up the first a big international collaboration. But the real breakthrough was ISIS 2, which Rory led. You know, I was part of the team, but really a lot of credit goes to Rory. And we showed thrombolytic therapy and aspirin both work. And together they reduced mortality by 45 to 50%. the first big breakthrough in acute heart attack studies. I then they kept me on all the retained me on all the ISIS steering committees, and then I decided to move to the US to the NIH. And when I was leaving Oxford, Richard said that and the reason I left was in those days there was a glass ceiling for people from India in the UK, and I did want to be an academic, a researcher, and while Indian doctors could aspire to go into general practice or even into community practice as a consultant, which was tough. To be a consultant in a teaching hospital or a professor was unheard of in those days. There was actually one person, Vijay Kakar, who became an eminent thrombosis researcher, but he was the exception. He faced a lot of discrimination. So Peter Slide said, "Why don't you go to the US and do well? And after a few years, they'll want you back." And he was completely right. And I kept my connection with Peter, who remained a mentor and a father figure to me till he died a few years ago. Very close friend. And Richard was also a mentor. And then they were right. After going to the NIH, I was offered positions back in the UK as professors in London and Manchester. But by that time, we had settled we were accustomed to the rather more open and warm society of the US. It's not to say that I wasn't surrounded by warm people in Oxford. And I got the opportunity to work at NIH, one of the best places in the world. I had three potential job opportunities, but this was the one that paid the least, gave me a 1 year job, and they wouldn't sponsor me for a green card at that time. As you know, if you're a foreigner, green card matters a lot. But anyway, the long and short of it is they gave me an H visa rather than a J visa. I did well enough for their satisfaction and continued. And they gave me two choices. They said you could design, they were looking for somebody who with clinical cardiology skills, especially heart failure skills, and clinical trial skills. And I had both. And they offered me that I could work either on big heart failure program with the preface nobody had done a big heart failure program before, and the other side is or a big hypertension program with the preface we've done two major hypertension studies before, and so it's very easy to take the previous protocols and modified it. I said no, I'll do the heart failure. So I got a choice. So I went down the heart failure path, and we created truly an innovative program which today still is the model in heart failure. Things have improved. It had two large trials and multiple mechanistic sub studies, and it transformed clinical research in heart failure and clinical care. Uh,
Absolutely.
yeah, I was involved in a few other projects that I helped started. That's where I started to gain the skills of helping other people. I'd say mentoring, but I was in a very warm atmosphere in NIH in my branch. There was only six of us as scientists. Two of us were clinician and scientists. Others were four were epidemiologists. One was a nurse. They were good friends, and most days of the week we'd go for lunch together, and we'd discuss anything from science to family to politics to world affairs to culture to anything. We still remain good friends.
I think whatever you're told just highlights one thing, the importance of a good mentor and being with that mentor in the right place at that right time. And really, it's really heartwarming. I don't know how many people are realizing this, watching this. I mean, speaking to a pioneer along with others and listening to the stories of beta blocker and aspirin, which today, as we all know, has changed the management of acute heart attacks. We have another MBBS student, Siddharth Senthil. He's also in third year MBBS. He was the sponsorship secretary, a debater, a singer, who would like to ask you a question, sir.
Welcome, sir.
Hello, am I audible? Thank you.
You
Hello.
are, and welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So you've been instrumental in establishing and promoting research in St. John's and inspiring countless young minds. So my question to you would be, in a world where there's an answer to almost every single question conceivable by man, what advice would you give to someone who's willing to pursue medical research, someone who wants to become a clinical physician and also do research on the side?
I mean, you had, did you say every question is answered by maths. Is
So
that
he says almost every question is answered, and in today's setting, and
yeah?
possibly in India, with the context of you being one of the pioneers, along with Dr. Anura and Dr. Prem Payas, in setting up STRI, what advice would you give to young medical students or some of us who would like to do research
Okay.
and be a clinician
Okay.
scientist?
First, let me tell you, most questions in health have not been answered. There's still big questions. It's just that the questions keep on changing, and they may be in different areas. We have made huge advances in cardiovascular disease prevention and treatment, but we're not implementing them. So we've improved our knowledge. So now the in cardiology at least, the focus reorients itself towards how can we implement what we know. Sounds less exciting, but actually that is the big question. If we implemented to a full extent what we know, we would probably save 5 times as many lives as we do with our current treatment. But the other part of it, there are other parts of medicine and health, and I'm using the word separately because health is includes medicine, but medicine by itself is not all of health. Health involves social factors, political factors, economic factors, design of communities, all of that. So the questions in health and medicine will change. They'll expand. There are many diseases for which we have very little knowledge, like dementias, what causes it, how do we prevent it, or frailty, or for that matter, other some neurological diseases like ALS or Parkinsonism. And there are lots of important questions. TB is still a major problem in the world, as is malaria. So I think it would not be appropriate to think that most of the issues have been solved. There's lots of issues to be solved. The other thing is you said you'd like to do a little bit of research on the side. I mean, let me ask you to think about one that comment. Do you ever think somebody can be a good clinician if they only did a little bit of clinical training on the side? And the answer is obvious. My suggestion to medical students is get a feel for research because research dr- helps you to ask questions, and asking questions, knowing how to formulate a question, lots of questions, but then to help formulate the question, which are the questions to be prioritized, because each of us have only so much time now or so much time in a lifetime. Prioritizing and focusing the question takes a lot of time. Before I embark on a study, it usually takes me 2 or 3 years of thinking and writing and doing pilot work before I embark on a major study. So now to the back to the student, attach yourself to a mentor who is doing serious research. By that, I mean somebody for whom research is not just a part-time hobby; it's almost central to their being. And there are a few people in St. John's, I'm pleased to say, and attach yourself to them, and then try to work on a small project because everybody wants to say, "Oh, let me cure cancer tomorrow," but it doesn't happen that way. Start on a small project, learn some of the skills, read books on methods. Now, it could be clinical research, it could be basic science, whatever it is. Do them. You've got excellent people in St. John's. Work with them, or there are people elsewhere, and gain the skills. Very unlikely as a medical student doing part time research, you're going to make big breakthroughs, but you will learn the skills. And some of you will gain a passion for research that will last a lifetime. So that gives you then a foundation. After you've had it at some stage, if you're serious about research, you should spend 2 to 3 years doing full time research, or at least 80, 90% of your time doing research in a place with the right environment, with the right people. Now aim to publish important papers, complete major projects, and then go on. So start as a student, but gradually build. And I think building a research career and gaining all the skills takes a minimum of 10 years. It's just like saying, is it Robert who is a pediatric surgeon? Just ask how many years did Robert train to be the wonderful surgeon he is? At least 10 years. That's the same thing that's going to happen. Now, then if you want to go one notch above and be one of the best in the world, it'll take another 5 or 10 years. My research training was 8 years, then another 8 years in NIH in a what should say, friendly, warm, and closeted environment. So 16 years. It's only after that I came to McMaster and started to develop my team. By that, over that 16 years, I'd gained a reputation, gained skills, learned how to raise money, learned how to do studies and build a connection. Then in the next 30 years, I've been able to do research that's largely originated by our group, and that's how it. So it's like building a skyscraper. It's one step at a time, one floor at a time. You start with the foundation. There's not a whole lot to see because it's underground, but you start with that and you build on it. I hope
In
I've
fact,
answered your question. Yeah.
yeah. So actually, Dr. Maya Mascarenhas, former president of the Alumni Association, daughter of the great Dr. Alfred Mascarenhas, has a question. She has just posted it on our YouTube channel. And the question is, how does one motivate the young residents to do research in the field, as there is a huge need to understand risk factors in the rural and urban poor?
Um, will you give me a second just to
Sure,
close
sure,
the
sir.
blinds because the sun is streaming through
Sure,
onto
sure,
my.
absolutely. No problems. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I hope at this point of time, all the Johnites and the others who have joined in for the first episode of the Johnite Tales are having a wonderful session. It's really been heartwarming and exciting for us from the St. John's Medical College Alumni Committee to be hosting this session with the great Dr. Salim Yusuf. If you have any questions or comments or feedback, or whom you would like to see next on the session, please do type in as such. Over to Dr. Salim to answer the question of Dr. Maya, which is, how does one motivate a young resident to do research in the field, in the field as in the community as such, where there is a huge need to understand risk factors in the rural and the urban poor?
I think it's like everything else. I mean, I think the rural postings that is currently the norm in St. John's presents an incredible opportunity for people to do something major. Now, is it 2 years at the moment that people have to do, Nitin, or
Yes,
to,
yeah, yeah.
and they're in the same place to try to develop something that is meaningful? 2 years is a lot of time. The first thing is to look.
Sorry, sir. So, if I could just interrupt, just so that you could answer both questions, Dr. Pritesh Kiran, who is a senior faculty in the Department of Community Medicine, also posted any particular message to young undergraduates to serve in underprivileged areas in the context of the current situation of competitive career and chasing PG. So, I thought both questions you could answer at one go.
Okay, it's not easy to answer both at one go. They're different questions. The first one is, how can you do some meaningful work? Let's call it meaningful work. Remember, the word research means search and research. Okay. I always start with, is what is the question? And so identifying a question that's important, that's answerable, and coming up with a stepwise approach to addressing it. So if somebody goes and says, look, I think I want to know, why do people smoke in the villages, or what is the effect of solid fuel cooking in households on health? Those are types of questions that can be addressed, and then somebody can say, let me look at the effects in those, say, let's just take lung function, which is sensitive to solid fuel. You look at lung function in 100 households who use solid fuels, and in another 100 households who don't, and you compare them and try to quantitate the amount of exposure historically. And today you have monitors where you can monitor it. You could do that and look at lung function or symptoms like cough or other respiratory symptoms like wheezing. So you start with the question, and then the question may then lead to saying, okay, we now know solid fuels does affect lung health. What can I do to reduce the amount of indoor pollution from it? So is it the design of a chimney so that more things go up outside? Is it the design of the kitchens where there are windows, or is it that the cooking is outside, or changing the cooking methods, which obviously is a little more substantive, using gas or electricity instead. So you address a question. So start with an important question, then go at it systematically. But the young person should then have a mentor. Now, my work in Malur, for instance, is we saw a lot of people coming in with GI symptoms, GI get viral diseases in the clinic. Out of 100 people, we'd review every day, 10 to 15 or 20 were diarrheal diseases. So we tested the well water, for coliforms as well as for chemical composition. And you'd wonder in 1974, 75, how do you do it? We went to the public health laboratory in Bangalore, got big containers, and then we got water out of the wells and we sent it to the public health lab and they analyzed it. Then we chlorinated it using something called Horrocks apparatus to understand chlorine demand. I don't know if it's still used, and taught. And we used high school students to help us. And then we measured the coliform levels in the 12 or 13 wells, and all but one well, the coliform levels went down. So again, it was a small project. We used existing resources. We didn't have any dedicated funding, and we co-opted the local community. So each question has different approaches. So I think start with the question that is relevant to the local context. Uh, and Ravi was very helpful in the design of that study. And then we wrote it up, and we presented it at a national meeting for a student award, and I was recognized. So I think you can do little things, and our rural posting was only 3 months in those days. So you can do significant things, but if you're interested, be interested in a question as opposed to I want to do research, and then the question may be amenable to research. Let me also say one other thing, Nitin, before I go off that topic. My career has been on research, and I don't want to leave people with the impression that the only thing that matters in medicine or health is research. In fact, most of us should be good clinical doctors. So never shortchange your clinical training. We should be good community doctors, which is a different set of skills. In my day, community medicine was not attractive to the best people in my class, the smartest people. Ravi was an exception. I hope it's becoming more and more attractive. And one way the college can make it more attractive is to come up with a diploma in rural health. I know giving degrees is hard, and we must think of creating dedicated rural health practitioners who have skills to serve or provide care in rural areas. And it's not just treating people one at a time, it's trying to understand outbreaks, it's trying to understand community level problems, understanding the environment. So I think these are important. Now, the second part of the question about underprivileged areas and competitive environment, you know, it is a reality that these things exist, but some people are motivated to go beyond it. I know that the college is restricted by the rules of the university and the rules of the Medical Council of India. But if I had an ideal way of doing it, I would create an MD program in rural health. And that program has a mixture of clinical learning, organizational learning. How do you organize health services in a rural community? Prevention, problem solving, like what are the problems in the area and how do you deal with it? And these people have as much stature and recognition as those in cardiology or gastroenterology or anything else. That will do two things. It'll make the specialty attractive. It should make it remunerative. And third, facilities have to be provided because many of these people are going to areas where there aren't adequate schools for children. So they got to think of how do people who are willing to dedicate their life bring up their families there. So uh, we need to think of this structurally. And I think if we do it, we could probably make a difference. And
I think that's some superb suggestion out there. An MD in rural health, and of course, St. John's can be the leading institute in the country to drive this forward, along with other similar thinking institutes like CMC. Well, we are coming to the end of the program, and we have one final question from George, the president of the current student committee, who is back with us, who's actually been controlling the entire program so far, the logistics and everything. George, over to you to ask, sir, your question.
Hi, sir. Am I audible?
Yeah, go ahead, George.
So you spoke about how you wanted to see a few changes towards the community health part of medicine. I was just wondering if you had any wider changes that you feel should be implemented in the Indian medical education system itself, or whether there's something that you've learned from the West that can be incorporated into our system that will make us all better doctors.
well, it's a big question. Let me put it this way. I think we should move, put less emphasis on an exam based, curriculum restricted education and more on self learning and completing projects, because what that those skills, you still have to learn some curriculum, but everything depending only on the body of knowledge you have and regurgitating in an exam is probably not the best way to produce doctors. I think there should be as much emphasis given on project work, on field work, and also in teaching the skills of problem identification and problem solving. So I think that's what I would say. I mean, if it's done at a national level, nobody's at a disadvantage. If it's done only in one medical school, then obviously the people in that medical school in the standard competitive exams would not necessarily fare as well. They might fare as well, who knows? So that will be at a high systemic level. Now, one of you sent me some questions. What advice do I have for St. John's? And give me three suggestions. I
Yes.
couldn't think of three suggestions, but I thought of one suggestion. And one suggestion is to is you see the college has had many different reviews conducted by alumni or faculty or something. I did one about 20 years ago, and when Father Percy was here and we gave it to them, I don't think it ever saw the light of day. I know since then Thelma Narayan did one, never saw the light of day. I would strongly urge that I mean, many things in those reviews are probably not applicable now, and some things may be. But there is no need to hide them, to share it with the leaders, the clinical leaders, heads of departments, faculty, senior alumni, senior students, and have a dialogue. And Velo does this very well. Every 5 years, they have a 5 day retreat where many faculty come together, they brainstorm ideas, and come up with a plan for the next 5 years. And the plan involves engaging people at different levels. It's not just the administrators involved in it, but it's also the clinicians, the faculty at different levels. Of course, not everybody can be involved, but you have a selection. And some of the students at the final year, or because they have seen what it is, and let that process be made public. Let that process, when I say public, within St. John's, and because when I visited Vellum a few years back, they actually gave me their reports and said this is what we do. Now I think we do something similar when at the end of 5 years, and you come up with a plan to implement it, monitor it. At the end of 5 years, you'll find only about half of them have been implemented, which is good, because if you did not have a plan, nothing would be implemented. And then you review things and you move on, and you need periodic introspection, review, honest dialogue, open dialogue. That would be my one single suggestion to the whole college, not just the leaders of the college, to the whole college.
Yeah, and I think fantastic. I think the key message there is introspection, reflection, and engaging with stakeholders across the board, and keep this process going on. I have a request, and that is I'm going to take your Viva. I'm going to ask you 5 questions, very non academic, and I hope you don't mind that. And the questions are going to be a little fun. And the first question is, which was your favorite subject during MBBS days?
Oh, it is medicine.
Medicine, fantastic. And which was the subject you found the most boring or
Mm,
challenging? Let's put it as challenging.
gosh, that's a hard one because honestly, when I did it surgery, I wanted to be a surgeon. When I did OBGY, I thought I wanted to be a gynecologist, obstetrician. I loved physiology.
Okay,
I,
so you
it was very hard to,
very hard. Okay, you just liked everything. I mean, some of us used to bunk some subjects, but I won't ask you that. All right, we move to the third question, which is, who's your favorite actor, or if you have anyone particular whom you have followed, actor in movies,
actor in movies. Oh,
actor, actress, anything.
uh, well, I must admit I'm not up to date on the Indian scene, so I'm going to
No,
give
during
you.
from your time too. Would
Yeah.
it be Amitabh? Would it be Rajesh Khanna? Who would it be during those times as such?
Oh, during the time I was there.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, at those days, I would say Amitabh Bachchan was just making his mark. I remember the movie that he did with Rekha. She was gorgeous in it, and
All
I
right.
think she was a heartthrob for all the medical
So at least
students.
we got the answer to who is your favorite actress. That is
So I
Rekha.
think it was great. But if you ask me globally, who are my favorite actors? At one stage, I would have said Peter O'Toole.
Okay.
Another says Anthony Hopkins. But there are these are fantastic character actors.
All right.
Or David Suchet, who does Poirot. So, or Kenneth Branagh. There are some very good people.
All right. And favorite holiday destination? Is there any particular place?
Well, it's always coming back to Kerala. It's my favorite holiday destination, but that's usually because of family. I love Kerala. Warts and all. It's God's own country. Except
What's what?
God doesn't know that yet.
Okay.
Yeah, but I would. I mean, there's so many places. How can I choose?
All right.
It is. I mean, Italy is a fantastic place. Brazil, I enjoy. Turkey, I've just come back from. Oh, I'm sorry, my puppy is trying to get into the
Sure.
water.
And the last question, favorite food? A favorite Indian food that you thought was a favorite restaurant in Bangalore?
Oh God, yeah. Can you give me a
Sure,
minute
sure,
to get
sure,
my
sure, sure.
puppy?
All right, we are almost coming to the end of the interview with Dr. Salim Yusuf. We thank you all, so many members out there joining us live on YouTube, across the platforms. Thank you so much for all the wonderful comments that you have sent, Dr. Pritesh, Dr. Maya, Dr. Binu Joy. Thank you all so much for the wonderful comments that you have sort of sent us as such. Fantastic to see the response and the encouragement that you're giving us in the Alumni Association. Right, sir. So we just wanted to end with asking, they always say food is something which is important. So your favorite food or favorite restaurant in Bangalore?
Oh, I can't now name restaurants in Bangalore. It's such a long time ago, so
Okay.
I really don't know. I usually go where I'm taken, but I think the favorite place to eat in Bangalore is the home of my dear friend Prem Pius.
Oh, all right.
But it's not
Fantastic.
so much the food, it's the ambience, it's the warmth, it's the friendship. So that's what I would say is my favorite place in Bangalore. I stay with him and we have very enjoyable, nice meals, home cooked. But most importantly, a meal is more than just the food. So I would say, I mean, I mean, I like Indian food. Don't get me wrong, but they're all wonderful. And even today, when I travel around the world, if I can get an Italy or a masala dosha, that is still high on my list.
I was hoping to hear the idli or the masala dosa
Yeah.
come there, and probably somewhere down the line, I'm sure you would say that apart from a healthy, nutritious food, it's also good conversations, which is cardioprotective, because that's what keeps the heart warm as such. Dr. Salim Yusuf, thank you so much for taking time off. We have had such a wonderful conversation and so many memories. There are so many people sending in a lot of reviews as such. It's a great privilege for me because right from the time I entered MBBS in St. John's, like I said, you were a name that we looked up to. And even today, when we do anything in research or look at meta-analysis, we feel proud that I really feel proud and blessed that I could have this conversation with you today. Thank you so much once again. And we do look forward to having you in Bangalore and having a live chat with you in front of all the students whenever that happens. With that note, I would like to invite Dr. Anthony Robert, President of the Alumni Association, to conclude the session for us today. If Dr. Robert could join us.
Dr. Salim, thank you so much for this intimate conversation which we had from you today. It was almost as if we were sitting in your living room with a cup of chai and listening to you. And thank you for sharing such minutes of your life, apart from just the academics or the research, but a look at the person that you are, the people around you who helped and shaped your thinking, and the importance of being surrounded by mentors and by good people. Nitin, you've excelled yourself as a consummate interviewer. I think you've just missed your profession. You should be doing this at a global level on a different media scale. Thank you very much, everyone out there on all the channels who have logged in. Thank you, Maya, for always being a support to our committee as well. And thank you for all the young and old Johnites. Before I sign off, I just wanted to request you all, since this is
Just
going to
1
be
minute,
an
sir.
ongoing...
Just want to thank Prithvi and George. If you could come on screen, you all have, both of you have worked behind the scenes so much. Thank you for making this happen. George has constantly been on the job doing this. Thank you, both of you. Thank you so much, Prithvi and George. Sorry to interrupt, sir. Please go ahead with your message
Yeah,
to
so
all alumni.
just an appeal to all the Johnites out there. We want to do this over the next few years, so we want a list of names. So you can please nominate your classmates, your friends, or yourselves even. Just write to Prithvi. He has a lot of channels, our official email or our website if you link, and give us the suggestions, give us ideas on how we can roll this forward. And thank you for encouraging us. And we're really proud to be Johnites. Thank you.
You know, Nitin, two names that come to mind that you definitely should consider interviewing. One is Evita Fernandez from my batch. She's
All
done
right.
remarkable things in terms of improving obstetric care in Andhra Pradesh across the whole state using midwives. And the other person is Auburn Jacob, who was, I
Oh,
think, the
yes.
first or second batch who was out in, who's, when you talk about rural health, he's really built an